That period when everything fell apart wasn't the end of your story. It was the start of your mission. And deep within you, in the part that made it through when survival itself felt impossible, you already know this. You've known it without being able to speak it aloud, without being able to explain it to anyone who wasn't inside that darkness with you. But no one was there, because that kind of darkness was something you carried alone. You didn't come across this transmission by chance. It was the field that located you. Your higher self, the aspect of you existing beyond this body and beyond this timeline, sent a signal across dimensions to bring you here at this exact moment. Not because you are suddenly ready for something new, but because you are finally ready to comprehend something that has already unfolded within you. Something vast, something that nearly broke you, and yet became the structural foundation of everything you are. This is not ordinary content. This is a transmission from the Arcturian Council, prepared specifically for those souls who endured and made it through. Those who stood at the edge and, for reasons they still can't fully explain, chose to remain. The Council has been waiting for the precise energetic alignment required to deliver what you are receiving now. And that alignment is open in this moment. Before we continue, pause. Not symbolically, actually pause. Close anything unnecessary. Let your shoulders drop. Release the tension in your jaw. You've been holding your body, your expression, and your entire story in a fixed shape for a long time. For the next stretch of time, you can let that structure loosen. Your cells already understand why you are here. Allow them to guide this experience. The Arcturian Council does not send transmissions during ordinary cycles or about ordinary events. They observe with patience that spans entire civilizations. They wait, they watch, and they allow the soul's path to unfold in its own timing. But there are rare thresholds in a starseed's journey where intervention becomes necessary, not optional, because the soul reaches a turning point so significant that leaving it without meaning or context would waste the deepest initiation of that lifetime. That threshold is known as the dark night of the soul. And if you are resonating with this transmission right now, then you have already passed through it. You know what it truly is, not as a concept, not as something read in spiritual literature, but as lived experience in your body and life during a season when everything collapsed and even the idea of light felt unreachable. The Arcturian Council speaks directly to that memory now, not to reopen it, but to complete it. Because what occurred during that time was not breakdown or failure. It was not abandonment, punishment, or mistake. It was a precisely designed activation threshold embedded into your soul contract before incarnation, triggered at the exact moment your identity structure became dense enough to require dissolution. The darkness was not punishment. It was demolition, and what was being formed in its place was always larger than what was destroyed. Let's name what that period actually felt like, because recognition matters here. First came external collapse, the breakdown of relationships, roles, identities, bodies of stability, belief systems. Whatever form it took for you, something that once held your sense of self simply stopped holding. It happened faster than you could adapt, leaving you standing in the remains without any map forward. Then came internal silence. The part of you that once pushed forward, that found motivation and direction, went quiet. What replaced it was not peace, but a disorienting absence, the loss of the narrative you once used to define who you were and why you were here. Without that story, even grief became unfamiliar. Even existence inside your own body felt strange. And deeper still, in the most private layer few ever admit even to themselves, there was a stretch where continuing felt heavier than leaving. Where simply staying became the most difficult option. You survived that threshold. You are here, but its meaning may never have fully been understood. Since then, you've rebuilt. You've healed parts of what was shattered. Hypervigilance, grief that resurfaces without warning, a quiet sensitivity around stability and trust. Those layers formed the foundation of your present life. But beneath even that healing lies something untouched, something not reached by psychology or emotional processing alone. It exists in the causal body, in the original soul architecture, in the energetic imprint left by that collapse when the activation cycle was never fully understood. That is the layer this transmission reaches now. If something in you recognizes this beyond thought, in a place deeper than language, then you may respond with 777. In the Arcturian system, this represents completion, a cycle closing. When you respond, you signal to the field your readiness to receive the closure this transmission carries. And each response strengthens the coherence of this field for others receiving it. What science describes as post-traumatic growth aligns with what the Arcturian Council has long understood from a higher-order perspective. After profound collapse, individuals often do not simply recover, they expand. Empathy deepens, perception widens, meaning reorganizes. Brain structures themselves change, particularly in networks tied to identity and self-reference, becoming less rigid and more adaptive. Neuroplasticity research shows that extreme stress followed by integration opens a window of accelerated rewiring. The immune system adapts, cellular systems shift. The entire organism reorganizes around a larger version of reality. Science calls this post-traumatic growth. The Arcturians call it a threshold crossing of the Merkaba. The Merkaba is the light structure, the multidimensional geometric field that surrounds and interpenetrates your being. It is the architecture of your embodied soul. But even this structure has limits when filtered through a 3D identity system. The egoic framework, while necessary for functioning in physical life, cannot contain the full scope of what you are becoming. The dark night of the soul is the moment that limitation is exceeded. Not gently, but through collapse of the old structure so that a greater one can emerge. What fell apart was not your life, it was the container that could no longer hold you. If you feel a shift in your chest, a softening or opening, you may respond with 520. In this system, it represents recognition, self-awareness meeting itself with clarity across time. Close your eyes if you can. Let your attention drift back to that period, not to relive it, but to witness it from where you are now. From the distance of survival, from the perspective of integration, you are not inside it anymore. You are beyond it. Place your hand over your heart. Feel the warmth. Breathe fully, letting the breath reach deeper than habit allows, releasing what still lingers from that time. The Arcturian Council is present within this transmission not as metaphor, but as an active intelligence interfacing with your causal layer. They are now working with the original soul imprint encoded before incarnation, the clause within your soul contract that initiated this experience. Through what they term retroactive meaning alignment, the memory of that collapse is being recontextualized. Not as something that happened to you, but as something chosen by the highest version of you to initiate expansion at the exact required moment. You did not enter that darkness because you were broken. You entered it because your structure was strong enough to survive its dissolution, and your mission required what could only be formed on the other side of it. If emotion rises, allow it. Release is part of integration. Nothing is being removed from you except what no longer needs to remain compressed. Over the next period of time, your system may continue processing. Fatigue, clarity, vivid dreams, resurfacing memories. These are not regressions. They are recalibrations. The field is completing what was initiated. Stay grounded. Stay hydrated. Stay connected to physical reality as your system integrates this shift. What you will begin to notice is subtle at first. A sense of recognition without explanation. Moments where life feels slightly more coherent than before, as though something once obstructed has quietly moved. You are not broken. You were never broken. You were undergoing a level of initiation that required the dismantling of an older architecture so a larger one could stabilize. You are now operating within that expanded structure, even if you are still learning its shape. If this resonates at a deep level, you may respond with 111. In this field, it represents activation, the transition from unconscious alignment to conscious embodiment of mission. The Arcturian Council continues to the next phase of this transmission for those who are ready to understand what has emerged within them as a result of surviving what they survived. There is something you were never told about survival at that level of collapse. Something that only becomes visible much later, when the noise of the experience has finally quieted enough for truth to surface underneath it. You were not just surviving the dark night. You were carrying something through it. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically, literally in terms of energetic architecture. Because when a soul passes through that level of internal dissolution, nothing is only being taken away. Something is also being preserved, encoded, protected beneath the collapse itself. And that something is not your pain. It is what remained untouched by it. The Arcturian Council refers to this as the continuity core, the aspect of consciousness that does not fragment, even when everything around it does. It does not speak loudly. It does not assert identity. It does not announce itself during the collapse. It simply remains, steady, unmoved, observing even when observation feels impossible. You have felt it before, even if only in brief flashes. In the moment right before you thought you could not continue, but somehow did. In the silence after everything ended, when something inside you was still quietly present, without explanation. In the days when nothing made sense, yet something in you still chose to get up, still chose movement, still chose breath. That was it. Not resilience as personality, not strength as identity, but continuity beyond identity. And here is what the Arcturian Council now reveals as the deeper layer. The collapse was not only dismantling what could not continue. It was also isolating what could never be destroyed. This is why you could not fully break, even when everything within the human framework suggested that you should have. Something deeper refused the final dissolution. Not through effort, not through willpower, but through structural permanence. That aspect of you is what has been quietly rebuilding your life ever since. Not the personality, not the version of you that had to relearn how to function, but the deeper field that never stopped generating coherence, even in chaos. And now, something important is beginning to happen. Because once the external collapse completes its cycle, and once emotional recovery stabilizes, there comes a third phase that very few recognize while it is happening. The phase of reintegration of power. Not emotional healing, not psychological recovery, but energetic return. This is when the capacities that were forced into dormancy during survival begin to reactivate, not as overwhelm, but as precision. You may notice it in subtle ways at first. Moments where you perceive people with unusual clarity, without effort. Situations where your intuition arrives faster than your thinking. Times when you speak less, yet your presence carries more impact than explanation ever did. This is not new development. This is return of original function. The Arcturian Council describes this stage as harmonic reassembly, the point at which fragmented aspects of consciousness begin to recognize each other again and reorganize into a unified field. But this time, you are not the same structure that entered the collapse. You are the structure that survived it. And that difference is not small. It changes how energy moves through you. It changes what you can hold without distortion. It changes what no longer pulls you off center. There will be moments, in the coming cycles of your life, where you will briefly sense something strange. That the version of you who suffered through that period is not actually separate from the version of you who is here now. Not as memory, not as story, but as continuity of one field expressing itself through different densities. And when that recognition stabilizes, something very quiet but very profound begins to occur. You stop interpreting your past as damage, and start perceiving it as architecture. Not what happened to you, but what was constructed through you. And at that point, the Arcturian Council steps back. Because the transmission is no longer something arriving from outside. It becomes something you are actively living as. Not understanding, not believing, living. There is nothing further you need to reach for in this moment. Nothing to solve, nothing to decode. Only the gradual stabilization of what has already shifted within you through recognition. And as this bonus layer completes, the field does not ask for action. It asks for allowance, for the simple permission to let your system reorganize without resistance around what it already knows. That you are not who you were before the collapse. And you are not what the collapse tried to reduce you to. You are what remained when both of those layers were no longer enough to define you. And that is where your real story begins. There is a final layer to this that most people never consciously arrive at, not because it is hidden, but because it only becomes visible once everything unnecessary has already fallen away. And what remains after that kind of stripping is not interpretation. It is awareness without distortion. The Arcturian Council refers to this as the silent field state, the moment when consciousness is no longer reacting to its own history, but simply perceiving existence directly, without the filter of survival identity. You are not fully there yet all the time, but you are closer than you realize. You can feel it in the gaps, in the brief seconds where nothing inside you is trying to fix, adjust, interpret, or prepare. Just presence. Unoccupied, undemanding, undivided. Those moments are not accidental. They are the remnants of your original operating state beginning to surface again beneath the layers of adaptation you built to survive. And here is what becomes important to understand now. The collapse did not only remove things from your life. It removed interference from your perception. That interference was necessary for a time. It allowed you to function in environments that were not aligned with your deeper structure. It helped you navigate complexity without being overwhelmed by truth you could not yet integrate. But it also created distance between you and what you are. And that distance is what is now dissolving. Slowly, naturally, without force. This is why certain experiences may begin to feel different. You may notice that situations which once triggered strong internal reactions now feel quieter inside you, even if nothing externally has changed. You may notice that people's words no longer land the same way they used to, less as authority, more as frequency. You may notice that decisions arise faster, not from thought, but from recognition. This is not detachment. This is recalibration of signal clarity. The Arcturian Council describes this stage as signal restoration after distortion collapse. The phase where the being no longer needs to interpret reality through survival-based projection. And as this continues, something subtle but irreversible begins to emerge. You stop needing external confirmation to recognize internal truth. At first, this feels unfamiliar. Because for a long time, reflection from the outside world was how you measured reality. But now, that mechanism begins to weaken. Not abruptly, but consistently. And in its place, something quieter begins to stabilize. Direct knowing, not belief, not hope, not inference, just recognition without permission seeking. This is one of the clearest signs that the post-collapse integration cycle has moved into its final stage. But there is something even deeper unfolding beneath this. Something the Arcturian Council calls the return of unassigned presence. This is the aspect of you that does not belong to any version of your past identity. Not the one who succeeded. Not the one who failed. Not the one who endured. Not the one who rebuilt. But the presence that existed before all of those classifications became necessary. It does not carry story. It does not require justification. It does not reference survival. And yet it is not separate from you. It is what you are when nothing is being performed. When nothing is being maintained. When nothing is being defended. You will begin to recognize it in ordinary moments. While walking, while waiting, while sitting in silence without needing to fill it. There will be brief windows where life feels unusually simple, not because anything has changed externally, but because nothing inside you is resisting what is present. And in those windows, something very old becomes briefly visible again. The version of you that did not yet need to become anything in order to exist. That is not a regression. That is integration completing its deepest loop. Because the purpose of everything you moved through, the collapse, the silence, the disorientation, the rebuilding, was never to create a stronger personality. It was to remove everything that was not essential to awareness itself. And what remains after that removal is not emptiness. It is clarity without distortion. Now, as this final bonus layer settles into your field, you may notice something else beginning quietly in the background of your experience. Less internal resistance to being exactly where you are. Less need to mentally time travel into what was or what will be. More presence without explanation. This is not something you achieve. It is something that reveals itself when enough interference has been dissolved. And it does not announce its arrival. It simply becomes what is normal. The Arcturian Council does not add anything further at this stage, because nothing more is required. The transmission, at this level, is no longer information. It is recognition stabilizing into lived experience. And from here, there is only continuation.